to provide an example, what Craig is talking about is like he went from manufacturing lawnmowers to manufacturing bulldozers like overnight.
Yeah, that's how it felt. I mean, everything was different. It was like deploying all over again at the end of a 12-month deployment,
Mhm.
just to a different part. This is Craig and Andrew, two Ranger qualified Army officers with MBAs, here to help you improve your business through leadership.
Each week, we'll deliver easy lessons from the battlefield to the boardroom on how to improve team performance. If you're a leader or want to be, this is the place for you.
Welcome to the cohort.
Disclaimer: the views in this podcast are those of the authors alone and do not represent the views of the Department of Defense or the U.S. Army.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about agility and how, as leaders, we've got to maintain the ability to change to an environment that is constantly changing. I think that as leaders, we're the ones that our team's going to look to when we have unexpected circumstances, whether that's something small like a truck didn't show up at its appointed time or something more serious. You know, we're still just a few years past a global pandemic that affected us all in some way.
Right, because you can have a plan, have everything set out, but things are going to change, right? There's going to be the unexpected event, and you've got to figure out how to navigate that change as a leader. And it's a pretty important skill set to develop, right? It's like a muscle, like anything else. You have to work at it. You get better at it the more you have to do it. But it's important to have some idea about the nature of doing that before you can get into something like that.
Yeah, and today I'm going to share an example of a story from Iraq where we received some pretty significant changes and how, as a team, we were able to adapt to that situation and be agile and try to be proactive. And I think an important thing to keep in mind is a lot of the stuff that we've talked about, whether it be communication and having standards, planning, as Andrew mentioned, all of this goes towards building trust in our teams. And that trust and all of these subsets really goes towards setting the conditions for an organization to be agile and not just the leader. It affects the entire team and how they're able to respond to these unforeseen situations. When I think of being agile, I think of it as being, proactive and being able to quickly respond and move. If you think to the agility drills you probably did in some sports growing up.
A football player being able to dodge and cut between players and defenders and things like that.
Yeah, it's that quick motion, usually to change directions. And that's what, comes to mind for me is how quickly can we change directions, and not just as an individual, but as an entire organization. And that's where, if we've built these other skills and we have that trust inside of our team, it's going to enable us to make that quick change of direction easier than otherwise would be.
Even in the Army, I see this as oftentimes an impediment, right? We're going to do this thing slightly different. And a lot of people have problems. Like, well, this is the way we do it because of this. And this is if we do it that way, it's going to cause this. And then in reality, like the problems they're bringing up aren't always insurmountable. Right. They can be overcome. It just takes the right kind of attitude and right leadership to communicate the change and show them the value. Like, listen, got it. We understand your concerns. This is how we can address them, and why it's important to do it this new way.
Yeah. And so to kind of set the stage of this story, this was from when I was a platoon leader in Iraq. I had a Stryker platoon of about 40 guys and 4 Stryker vehicles. We had been operating in Baghdad for about a year. This is back when we did 15-month deployments. And so we were well entrenched, not literally, but we were very in tuned to the Baghdad area that we operated in. Like I said, I've been there about a year already. We were 11 to 12 months probably. And we had been operating there, came back from patrol and was told, hey, the commander wants to meet with all platoon leaders at, whatever time that afternoon, that evening, which was not uncommon. We regularly had planning meetings, training meetings, different topics to go over things. And all the leadership was in there, and he let us know we had received a change of mission, our entire squadron. And so there's 4 companies, and we were going to relocate from Baghdad, where we had been operating, all the way up to Mosul, Iraq, which is 250 miles, 4 or 5 hour drive away up into the northern province of Nineveh. And it came really as a shock because there was no indications. When I woke up that morning, if you had asked, hey, what are the chances of you driving north to Mosul in the next few months? I'd bet you a crisp $20 bill it would never happen. There was no indications of this. And so, that sounds like an easy task at the beginning until you realize that, okay, we don't just have these trucks. We have all of our equipment, which that includes everything from like all the soldiers' spare uniforms and clothes and, snacks they may have bought or whatever we have accumulated over our time there, in addition to all of the ammunition supplies, all of the weapons equipment that we had. So we had these big Connex containers full of stuff that we didn't use necessarily every day, but we had available. Spare radios and batteries and all these things. So it wasn't like we could just load up our truck and make that drive and be done and be there. And so there was planning involved. Our squadron operations cell worked on that, and we had one stop about, roughly halfway up for refueling, because you don't want to make contact with the enemy when you're sitting low on gas.
Got a
and not
quart
be
tank
able
of
to
gas
maneuver.
and you're getting shot at.
And so we went through all this planning, but to have to walk back out of that meeting and then call in my squad leaders and get the platoon together and say, okay, hey, change of mission. I know everybody is comfortable here. Everybody knows this area, knows our job here and how things have been going. And to immediately, and what made this probably the most complicated is, if I remember right, our time frame on this was like maybe 2 weeks. It was very short.
Yeah, it's not a
It
lot of
was
time.
no, it was one of those where you want to be confident in your ability, but at the same time, you're like, really, 2 weeks? Because we hadn't even identified who the unit would be that came to replace us. Because, we talk about backwards planning. Well, if I'm going to go to Mosul, well, who's going to be here in Baghdad to take over this battle space that we've been patrolling? And the answer at that time was, we don't know who that's going to be. Allegedly, there's a unit out there somewhere that's going to be here, hopefully this week. We don't know. And we don't even know if that unit's in country yet. We don't know if they're just going to expand someone else's battle space. But we pack all our stuff, get everything ready to make the drive. And then, so even small things that, you forget about sometimes, like we cross-trained for a lot of positions in the Army. And I think that's an important skill, so that you have multiple people who can do the same task. And where it played into us for this was drivers. So the drivers before the refueling stop versus after, because we were only stopped for, I want to say it was maybe 6 to 8 hours, because we were rotating through as we came in. Only to get, our main purpose there was for fuel. And you had to look at it from a leader's perspective of, okay, what do we do with our drivers? Do we rotate them out? Or as soon as we get there, does that driver get out of the truck and go somewhere to sleep for a few hours so that they're refreshed, ready to make the rest of the drive up. And, everybody, each, platoon and company kind of did that a little bit differently, um, depending on the cross training, depending on their comfort level with different drivers. But we had to, that's not something that we did on a regular basis. You don't normally go on a road trip when you're in combat. You normally are assigned to one given area, and that's where you operate. And to show you the amount of time and how quick this all happened, when we arrived in Mosul, they were literally building the hooches that we were going to live in when we parked the trucks. They didn't even have buildings for us to stay in that night. If I remember right, we actually slept in the trucks the first night, or at least a portion of us did, because we parked and I actually think it was a Navy Seabees unit that was running around still slinging hammers, putting up some sea huts for us, which we were grateful for. But I mean, you could tell they were looking at us like they got the same timeline, like, hey, need to add on to this base here in the next 2 weeks, so get to work. And so we did. We made that drive up there, and it was not just a different location. And that's one thing that I think is important to point out is we were in Baghdad. We owned a territory or battle space, and I guess is the easiest way to explain it. And we had relationships with people there. There were places we knew we could go to the local chai shop and talk to somebody about how things were going that week. We knew who lived in certain places. We knew the good guys, the bad guys. And we had a level of comfort there. And that's the way we had been operating.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just that we changed the location. Is when we went to Mosul, we no longer had our own battle space. We were
Right.
considered an above ground force, and we were only there to do major clearance operations and terrain denial for areas that had never had a unit assigned there. Primarily at that time, it was kind of out in the desert west of Mosul for the terrain denial, and then in the city for major clearance operations. And it was not just a shift in location, it was a shift in our mission and how we've been doing things.
Mm.
And I think that as a leader, it's important to be able to have have that trust built in your team, because that was not a scenario where we could just easily say, hey, I know, and instead of doing a patrol on this street tomorrow, we're going to go a block over. It was an upheaval of our lives, essentially, is what it felt like. I mean, it really felt like deploying all over again. We went from going from when I was in that unit, we were actually in Germany. So we moved from Germany to Iraq. But we moved so far in Iraq to an entirely different city, entirely different area, without knowing any of the people. It felt like going back to day one.
Mm.
And I think in those scenarios, it would be really easy for an organization to make some mistakes on fighting amongst themselves. And I don't want to do it. I don't like change. And why is it that we have to do that? And questioning everything, as opposed to just react, make that quick movement in a different direction. So we're going to relocate to a new city. We're going to do different types of operations than we had previously done. And we're going to be a value add no matter where we go and what assignment we receive.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point, Craig. You could have let that really pretty hefty feat, right, overcome your unit's ability to continue to operate, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't want to be pejorative and say, oh, woe is me, right? Like we have to move so far and do all this new stuff all over again, and we have to wait 8 hours at a gas station. It's oversimplifying the process. But that could have easily have gone a way that would have prevented you and your team from operating effectively in its new role, right? With all those little nuances you just mentioned, a totally new mission, new place, not familiar terrain. But instead, right, it's this idea that and the attitude that, oh well, this is our new mission and this is where we're going to go and this is where we're going to do it. So let's figure out how to do it.
Yeah, and it was interesting because we even found ourselves doing tasks that while we were trained for them, we hadn't really been utilizing.
Mm,
I know for a lot of when we went out in the Wild West, as I like to refer to it, because it was out in the middle of the desert, we had to set up a retrans station to be able to talk on a radio. And so we were so far away from the base. If one platoon was going out there, you had to take another one and go up on this ridge line and set up a retrans, which basically
gosh.
allowed you to extend your radio's range. And we had come from Baghdad to where I could talk to my company headquarters no matter where I was inside of our battle space. It was easy to get radio transmissions out, and to have to go and do that, it was something we hadn't done since we were training back in Germany.
Mm,
And so it was a lot of these little things that any one individual task was not that difficult. But when you stack them all up and you put them in a time constraint of just a few weeks, and I mean, little things like when we pull up and they're still building the hooches, and I've got guys that are tired and hungry, and I want to just tell them, hey, go get some food. I don't even know where the chow hall is. I can't even tell them like, "Hey, go there." So my platoon sergeant and first one are running around trying to make sure all that stuff is in order and that getting people to food and things like that because you're in a totally different environment. And I give a lot of the credit all to my team because they were very resilient. It reminds me of the idea of the growth mindset
mm,
of they were not just fixed in the ways we had been doing things for the past almost year. They were like, hey, we'll just keep adapting to whatever we're handed. We're gonna make these changes and keep moving forward. And I think that the only reason that allowed that was because of the cohesiveness and that trust that we had built
mm.
up. That no matter what task we were given, no matter what hand we were dealt, we trusted each other that we would make the best of the scenario, no matter good or bad.
Yeah. So I think an important piece you're missing there, Craig, as humble as you are, is that the unit typically takes on the personality of the leader, right? If the leader is confident and says, hey, I don't know the answer, but we'll be all right, we'll figure it out. The unit typically takes that on as well. So because of the way you led, because of the way the things you said, right? It gave your unit those words and that vocabulary and that attitude to take on the new mission, right, and accept it as it is instead of throwing their hands up because they don't know where the chow hall is. They've been driving for 8 hours.
Yeah. And I think it is as leaders, we're always going to have those times where it's like, man, why are they doing this to us? Why are they sending us
Mm,
up here? Why this? Why that? But I think back to that duck example. You can have that in your mind, and you can go and ask your boss that. I mean, I went to my commander like, "Hey, sir, why this?" or trying to get clarity or understanding on things. I think that's appropriate. But when it comes time to explain to my team, I'm going to keep all my little duck paddling to myself, and I'm going to on the top as best I can remain
yeah,
calm, cool, and collected
yeah.
and prevent them from seeing that I'm paddling with all my might under the surface.
I was like the duck example.
I refer to it a lot, but I think it's something that for me at least comes to mind. It's a good visualization of
Yeah,
the and it's not being unauthentic either. I mean,
yeah.
it's still me here. I'm still being real. I'm not lying to anybody. I'm not trying to put on a false persona.
Mm,
I'm just trying to, make sure that my team understands that I am confident in them and that I do know that we're going to be okay. There's some things that, you know, we talk about the burden of command sometimes, and there's certain things that the leader just has to bear
mm,
and protect their team from that.
yeah. I think that's a good story. I mean, I think it you really kind of pull out some of the importance of being agile, and when it comes to some of these bigger changes, right? Those are pretty significant change. Hopefully, not all changes are quite that impactful, but things are going to change, right? You can have the best written plan, but not everything's up to you. Not everything's up to your team. Not everything's up to your boss. Things are going to change, and you have to figure out how to still continue to work, and how to allow and promote your team to be able to work effectively within the new change.
Yeah, because it was interesting going from that meeting to 2 weeks later, we had already moved up there and we're flying around in helicopters, doing aerial reconnaissance, looking for an area we're going to go, search for HVTs or do clearances. And it's like, man, 2 weeks ago, this is not what our life was like. And we had
Yeah.
made these, sudden change and essentially without issue, without any major problems. And again, it goes back to, we could trust each other and we had good communication and all those things that we've previously talked about.
Yeah. So to provide an example, what Craig is talking about is like he went from manufacturing lawnmowers to manufacturing bulldozers like overnight.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's how it felt. I mean, it was like I said. I mean, we everything was different. It was like deploying all over again at the end of a 12-month deployment,
Mhm.
just to a different part. So,
Well, thanks for sharing that, Craig. I think that's valuable.
yeah. Well, appreciate y'all listening, and hopefully y'all can find some value and insights in there.
Thanks, everybody.
Y'all have a good one.
As always, take these lessons, use them, and spread them. Everyone is welcome in the cohort.
Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe for more, and drop us a line at commandpostcohort.com to request a specific topic.
We'll see you next time on the cohort.